It's now 5:30. I will call this special joint study session of the Town Council and Planning and Zoning Commission to order. Clerk, would you please call the roll for council and then the commission?
Councilmember Lopez.
Present.
Councilmember Keel.
Present.
Councilmember Freund.
Present.
Councilmember Greer.
Here.
Councilmember Schumacher.
Present.
Vice Mayor Searcher.
Here.
Mayor Pogood is not here tonight. We have a quorum. So now roll call for Planning and Zoning. Commissioner Laney.
Here.
Thank you. Commissioner King. Present tonight. Commissioner Hua.
Here.
Thank you. Commissioner Bordon.
Here.
Thank you. Commissioner Rutherford, not present tonight. Vice Chair Erb
Here.
and Chair Griffiths.
Here.
We have a quorum.
Moving on to our item number 2, discussion items. Item 2A, sustainable strategies, growing water smart. John, take it away.
Thank you, Vice Mayor, council members, Vice Chair, and commissioners. What we'd like to do today is share ongoing collaboration amongst staff and across our multiple departments on this subject that you see on the slide. You know, sustainable strategies that are ongoing and looking forward. We'd like to share that with you and answer any questions you have, give you some more data down the road if you like. The growing water smart term that you heard and you see on the slide, we borrowed that from the Sonoran Institute. You may be familiar. They are a nonprofit conservation organization. And I'll get back to that and let you know why that's important in a minute. The keep growing water smart in mind, that's one thing that we continue no matter kind of what discipline that we're working within, that we keep in mind, especially here in town and regionally and statewide. One of the things that we would like to touch on there you go. What you see here is sustainable practice by design. And that's the overarching theme today that we'd like to talk to you about. And again, answer any questions you have. The by design is important in that title because what that reminds us and lets you know, this is an intentional effort. Like I said, we keep these strategies and we're always researching for better technologies. So that by design is critical because it's an intentional move to coordinate with the team that you see on the slide. What you see is representatives from Development Services. I'm John Jacobson, a Principal Planner in Development Services. We also have with us Nick Grabluski, and he's our Park Manager. He's out of Park and Recreation. And Ariana Odom is with our Public Works group, and she's a Stormwater Coordinator. We have Tracy Lund, who is our Water Resources Advisor, and she's in Utilities. And again, this is a conscious collaboration that we continue and wanted to share that with you. One of the examples, well, let me read this statement on here. Applied research and best sustainable practices significantly improve environmental conditions, economic stability, ecosystem services, and human health and culture. So that's really our motivator. That's something that we rely on, we refer back to, and really led us to having this discussion today and amongst ourselves. What you see on the left side panel are the topics that we'll talk about today. So we have design, manage, recharge, and conserve with the staff that I just went through and how it's aligned. Now within those, what we'd like to do today is focus on the elements underneath each one of those topics. So we'll each go through that with you. And when we do that, if you see at the top, you'll see benefits, requirements, and implementation. So for each of those topics, each one of us will run through those and answer any questions you have, but really how those apply to these different, what I call areas of focus, which are the vegetation and the built environment, parks and open space, and green infrastructure and stormwater, and the conservation plan that's pending that Tracy will be working on and we're hoping to have adopted by the council. So let's start right off with vegetation and the built environment. And again, let's start with benefits. The statement here is skillful use of vegetation in the built environment is integral to quality of life, sustainability, and resiliency. So again, that's kind of the platform we're working with. So what we talk about on those subjects is the emphasis on skillful use, because really that's what we're tied to. We need to make sure that we're being diligent in the skillful use of vegetation. And the reason I emphasize that is it's not about quantity or density or a specific type unless it's a skillful application of that. So if you're building a habitat, what's appropriate for the type of vegetation? If you're working on streetscape, what's appropriate? What's the appropriate density? We consider, again, water use. And that skillful use really drives us and keeps us accountable. What we'll do is run through these bullets and the benefits of vegetation in the built environment. Improve water quality and air quality, reduction of flooding, erosion, storm surge, and other weather disasters, mitigation of climatic problems such as heat islands, habitat of wildlife and pollinators, carbon sequestration, increased connection with nature. If you look at the image on the top right, if we talk about heat island and that subject, that's just a quick snapshot. If you look in the foreground, you see hardscape that's in the direct sun. It absorbs heat and it radiates back in the evening, and that's the definition of a heat island. If you look down the road with the shade and shadow, you can see what the vegetation offers and what the benefit of that is. The image right below that, you would recognize. You know, that shows the pollinator in action with the, again, skillful application of the type of vegetation. Now, requirements, as you would expect, specific to development services especially, but applies to all applicants and development, is through the town code. Health, safety, and welfare is the critical path here. That's what drives us for decisions on the code and how we apply it. It's all about safety, health, and welfare. And I've given some examples. I won't read them all, but these are extracted from the code, Chapter 13 zoning code. So if you look, for example, on street frontage, that example you saw in the last slide with the plantings and the streetscape, you know, one thing we require on any new development is that the first 7-foot depth into their property, or what some people will call the front yard, we require a specific number of plants. For example, trees, based on the total length, every 30 feet you have to have a tree. And that defines the density. Do they have to be 30 feet separated? Absolutely not. They can't be more than 50 feet because we want to get that repetition and pattern on the streetscape. But that's an example of how we calculate the density and type of plant. In this case, it's trees, but also for every tree, you have to have 4 shrubs. So that's an example of a requirement. And the rest listed there function in the same way. And again, we're constantly revisiting these requirements in the town code. We just updated Chapter 13 this past year. And as you would expect, it's a living document. We're always running through it. We're always looking at precedent. We're always looking at the application and asking ourselves, is the intent being carried through? Even if we update the code, we continue to do that to see where we can see more benefits and infuse those into our requirements moving forward. What you see on the right, the bottom image, shows that in addition to the text in the code, we also use graphics and imagery to help communicate what our intent is on any given requirement in the code. Again, we'll move along to implementation. How do we implement this successfully? And the vegetation in the built environment, the statement is, vegetation is a powerful and highly cost-effective tool for sustainability and resilience on individual sites as well as community-wide, and the ecosystems, which is really sensitive to us in this area. And so that implementation not only is carried out through the code, like I mentioned, the requirements, but we also look at, again, our interdisciplinary coordination and collaboration amongst staff that you'll hear from, and through departments. It's not limited to each one of us as staff people. This group of 4 that you see in front of you, or you're going to hear from the rest of the team here, in the past, we worked together. Like I said, we continue to. One example is we attended January of this year, a Water Smart put on. I said I'd get back to the Sonoran Institute and that Water Smart. That was the example. We went to this workshop, 3-day workshop over in Clarkdale. The 4 of us and council person Janelle Keel joined us, and extremely successful. We really saw the value in that. And it was truly a workshop. Yes, there were some seminars where they were speaking at us, but the breakout sessions, I think we all agreed, were extremely valuable. And some of the breakout sections were with regional people that are experts in water in this specific area. This Water Smart workshop was contained to the Quad Cities and a little bit more regionally. But what I learned, not being a water expert like the rest of the team has more experience, really came away with a better understanding of the sensitivity and the experts in the area that have data that needs to be reviewed and updated, and all the things that you know about and have read about. But also some of the breakout sessions were the 5 of us, including Janelle. And again, we just saw great value in that. And those, even our small group, was facilitated by the Sonoran Institute. So they had experts facilitating even our small group. And one of the things that we came away with was that continued collaboration. We learned a lot about each other, what each other's discipline is, and how it ties to each other. And we've continued. After that workshop, we have follow-up meetings, not only with the Sonoran Institute and Water Smart, but amongst ourselves. We'll follow up, make sure we're addressing our action items that came out of that effort. So that's one example of our continued collaboration. What I'd like to do is have Nick come up. Nick, again, is our manager of our parks. And what you need to know is Nick is extremely knowledgeable. And I know he's in the trenches a lot. He doesn't necessarily do presentations and things, so that word doesn't get out. But anybody that's been around our Parks and Recreation and Bobby, who's our director, and not only that, Nick is passionate about what he does. Think about it. He's, in some ways, I know they have a great team, but he's responsible for managing 26 parks, over 13 miles of trails, and everything that goes along with that, the maintenance, the irrigation, the plant material, any improvements that are being considered. He's in the room to say what the impact of that would be, and how we address it. And it's amazing to me that there's only one Nick and everything gets done the way it does. It's just shocking. And I've been around, Parks and Rec my whole career, for 3 decades as a landscape architect, working with different agencies, different park managers. And I still say that I asked Bobby, there's more than one Nick, isn't there? Because one person can't do all this. So I'd like to hand it off to Nick, and he'll talk about parks and open space and his water management and vegetation. Thank you.
Thanks, Sean. Appreciate it. Thank you, Vice Mayor, Council. Like John had mentioned, we do understand the immense responsibility we have, being as we have so much irrigation of such a large amount of water we are using and responsible for managing. Having said that, we understand that benefit of what we bring to the public and the town as well. So it's that nice fine balance we're always trying to find. So the Parks and Recreation Department, we manage 45 acres of turf grass. That's all cool season, perennial rye, Kentucky bluegrass, numerous trees, numerous shrubs. With that turf grass, we get the benefits of hosting youth events, community spaces, a lot of those other benefits John mentioned, environmental, erosion control, helping with the air quality, even just helping with everyone's well-being. You know, everyone looks out at a nicely manicured piece of lawn or some nice trees and shrubs, and we totally understand what that brings, the value that brings to people's lives. So I'd like to just go over kind of how we operate, what we do in order to make sure we're being as responsible as we can managing these pieces of different vegetation. With our irrigation, we begin watering in March, but that's kind of on a tiered structure. So we'll begin watering sports fields and civic center, any of our big event spaces in March, getting them ready for the busy season tournaments, our spring fair, events like that. We'll bring in those neighborhood parks right after, doing that in April. Trees, we kind of keep in line with those April waterings, just trying to conserve as much as we can while also keeping things healthy and ready for the community. In a typical year, this one wasn't one of them, but on a typical winter year, we like to shut down our irrigation in November and not touch it again until March. That's if we're seeing the nice rainfall, the snow, everything we need like that. That's when we can let that grass go dormant, let those trees go dormant, and we won't touch it. And that gives us a good chance to kind of save water, do projects, but also know we're not having to run that supplemental irrigation. Not saying that happens every year. This year was one of them. We did have to water some. If we're not getting rain and snow, we do still have that responsibility to keep things healthy. So it's that, again, fine balance. And then on the tree side of things, that's something we take great pride in here at the town of Prescott Valley. We are a Tree City USA recipient. It's actually our 20th year getting that honor. It's a program that just recognizes municipalities that prioritize tree and urban forest management in our day-to-day operations. So the guidelines are committing $2 per capita to tree management. That could be encumbered in a number of ways: water, fertilizers, mulch, plantings, new trees, tree removal, really anything and everything related to tree maintenance. But that is something we take great pride in. We're always trying to grow our canopy every year. That's kind of a town standard we have. If we remove 20 trees, we want to be planting 25 of them. We want to always keep growing that urban forestry, knowing, like John had mentioned, that heat island effect and the benefits we see out of trees. We always want to grow that canopy as much as we can. We always aim to plant trees that are moderate to extremely drought tolerant. Obviously, in park systems, sometimes you have to deviate a little bit, get some shade. You got to really understand the intended need of the tree and what it's going for. But for the most part, we're always aiming for drought tolerant plants. When we do plant our trees, we're always giving it, kind of pushing that water to it in the first 2 to 3 years. Once they're established at that maturity, then we're able to really back down that supplemental irrigation. That's when this time of year, June, we're hot, we haven't gotten much rain in the hundreds. That's when we do have to provide some of that supplemental. But our trees, once established, do really well, and we don't have to push near as much water as you might think. Some of the trees we typically like to see, or you'll see on this campus or within our park system, that we know work well for us and also kind of handle that drought tolerance and the heat and the cold and every different thing we see in our zone. Deodar cedars, maples, pears, plums, ash, chatalpa, globe willows, desert willows, purple robes, and Austrian pine. So not saying that's not a one-size-fit-all. Every project's a little different, every park's a little different, but that's what we always are aiming for, is a good diverse canopy, good diverse landscape. The factors we consider when choosing trees are obviously the location, what park, what area of the park, the water use, how much irrigation is it going to need, current site conditions, species we already have established. We don't like to get one kind of a monocrop culture where one disease comes in and can knock out, 75% of your trees. We're always trying to be as diverse as possible. Desired growth rate, and then intended benefit, desired outcome. So we have memorial tree programs. Sometimes those are more ornamental, being the benefit we're seeing out of those, and sometimes we're looking for shade. It really just depends on the intended use. Big user obviously is the turf grass. Like I said, we have 45 acres of that kind of spread across our 26 parks. We're fortunate enough in 2011, 2012 to get a grant from the Federal Bureau of Reclamation that allowed us to switch everything over to a centralized control system that's smartly programmed. It utilizes different in-the-field conditions along with current weather conditions, what we have equipment-wise, and spits out a run time that gets us very close to what we needed. So instead of the guesswork of one guy who's thinking he knows how much water it needs, we let this system based off, evapotranspiration rate, distribution uniformity, sprinkler type, plant type, slope, soils, really anything and everything in that park. We factor that in, and then that system spits us out a run time for each zone. So takes a lot of the guesswork out of it. There's always some fine tuning we have to do on our side of things. That really allowed us to really get on track on the conserving water. And then, like I said, we've been doing it for 12 years. With that central control system, we can shut it off anywhere you have internet connectivity. It is cloud-based. So if I'm at home, I know it's raining, I can pop on real quick, get it shut off. If we got a main line break or an overflow, any situation like that, we can adjust and fix that issue, at least get the water to stop from home, from a computer, from the office, which also saved a lot of driving around time. With that system, we were able to implement hydrometers. Those are master valves on our main lines, so our main lines aren't sitting there pressurized all day long, only at nighttime when they're running. So it helps us save water on leaks, helps the wear and tear on the pipe. If there is a leak, it'll send us an email. We can always shut it down, locate the leak, fix it, get the system back up and running. So we were able to conserve water in that regard too. And like I said, all these have luckily been in place for about 12 years. And we have them almost everywhere. Only issues in Stone Ridge, we don't have enough cell connectivity. So every other park in the kind of Prescott Valley proper area, we do have these systems here on Civic Campus as well, and it's worked out great for us. The way we irrigate our plant life, or our turf grass resources are distributed kind of based off that same tiered system when we start up in March and April. So obviously sports fields, anything that's hosting big tournaments, athletic events, as well as the Civic Campus are going to get the bulk of our resources, the bulk of our attention, making sure we're keeping those as well maintained and healthy as possible. Small neighborhood parks still see regular daily maintenance, but they're just on that other tier. We try to conserve a little water through them so we can make sure our event and tournament spaces are as nicely maintained as possible. And yeah, we've kind of been at this. I've been with the town since 2006, and almost the entire time I've been here, we've been kind of punching away at this, trying to kick in, being a little more conservative as we possibly can. Like I mentioned, implementation of smart irrigation control, weather-based flow sensing valves, some of the other items we've done, just redesign of old systems. Some of these parks are 30 years old. Just kind of anyone and everyone designed them, whoever was building the park, a lot of inefficiencies. So something as simple as changing the spacing on our sprinkler heads allows us to close that gap, get rid of those dry spots, eliminate the need to water during the day, keep it only watering at night, be as efficient as we can. Examples of where we've done these projects: Tano South, we did a whole redesign, Antelope Park, Pronghorn Soccer Field, Community Center Park, George Anderson, and several areas at Mountain Valley Park. So we're always within our yearly and daily operations, just trying to make sure we're improving upon those efficiencies as best we can. And also some artificial turf. We got to kind of weigh those, the pros and cons of that. But being able to implement some artificial turf keeps our that field up and running year round, while also saving the water, saving the maintenance. So it's always a balance, seeing what we can do to just keep getting better. Some future opportunities that we have, eliminating some maybe underutilized turf areas that don't necessarily need to be turf, turning those into some zero-scape, low impact, similar to what we have here at the library. So we have some opportunities for that. We are researching soil sensors that we can distribute across the field. Those will let you know if this area of the field's wet, it'll shut off irrigation automatically. Well, if this area is dry, due to those inefficiencies we do see in irrigation systems, even the best systems only 70% efficient. So you do have areas that do get wet, some stay dry. So those soil sensors would allow us to shut off areas that stay wet while also irrigating things that that need it. Continued retrofit. If you ever go out to Viewpoint Soccer Field this time of year, you can see a lot of the dry spots. That's just due to irrigation inefficiencies. Spacing on the heads is incorrect. So total redesign there. Sunflower also needs it. Tunnel Park North is another candidate. So always looking at those. Possible artificial turf expansion down the road on some fields. And then as well as some rainwater, stormwater collection and management projects. And I think that's where Ari's going to step in, and she can kind of discuss all that with you. She is our stormwater coordinator. Thank you so much.
Good afternoon, Vice Mayor and Council. I am here to talk to you a little bit about green infrastructure and stormwater. So as we know, stormwater is not filtered as it flows through our drainage and channel systems. So this is where green infrastructure is a great way to process and manage that stormwater sustainably by improving water quality and reducing flooding while offering environmental and community benefits. So as I mentioned, stormwater reduces flooding, it absorbs and slows stormwater runoff. It also improves the water quality. That natural vegetation filters the pollutants through soil and the vegetation. It also helps to recharge groundwater and supports biodiversity and improves air quality. Some of the requirements for green infrastructure within stormwater is we want to meet we want to control that runoff volume, and green infrastructure helps us to capture and retain a portion of that stormwater on site. It also helps us to filter and treat pollutants before it discharges, so it alleviates pollutants within the water and increases our water quality. Infiltration capacity, soils and systems must support adequate infiltration rates and use of native vegetation. This is required to improve effectiveness and resilience. We want to use native plants that don't use a lot of our water, drought tolerant plants. I work with Nick to help choose those plants when we're looking at different projects here. Implementation. So implementing green infrastructure involves planning, design, and community engagement to integrate sustainable stormwater solutions in local landscapes. One of the main projects we're looking at here now is the George Anderson Park. It's going to be a green infrastructure project. It's going to alleviate some of the erosion that is currently located at the park. We are working with Scout Troop 303 to get this done. And our date for planting is actually July 16th of this next month coming up. We have future planning. The next project location is going to be similar to George Anderson. I am currently working with John, Tracy, and Nick to select another project. And this one will be with our Growing Water Smarts, through our Growing Water Smart group. We're going to try to utilize the funding from that program, and funding would be anywhere from $12,500 to $25,000. So we're trying to do a lead by example type thing. We created a residential green infrastructure guidebook for residents to show them how easy and it can be to implement green infrastructure within their homes. So this is going to give everyone an opportunity to help us install green infrastructure within our town and also see how easy it is to do at home. We are going to look at targeted problem areas where, whether it's a town-owned lot, right-of-way easements, or parks. Some of the non-structural measures that we've done, as I mentioned, we developed the residential green infrastructure guidebook for homeowners, and we also are developing one for business owners as well. We are continuing to update educational materials and promote awareness wherever we can. We are also on a larger scale utilizing our master drainage plan, which is not mentioned here, but to look at future CIP projects to mitigate flooding and also help with groundwater recharge. With that being said, I'm going to hand it over to Tracy, who is our water advisor, and she can talk to you more about conservation. Thank you.
Vice Mayor, Council, Planning and Zoning Committee. Thank you. I just wanted to, obviously, so conservation, what does this have to do with conservation? Well, really, I see this, all of this being a nexus to the water question here in Prescott Valley. So I see my role in the conservation plan as actually trying to get all of these things written down, all these things documented, see what we can do in addition to that to try to minimize the amount of water that we're pumping from our aquifer while also maintaining a high quality of life here for the town. So we're going to be documenting all of our current practices, assess our irrigation practices that Nick has talked about. Are there any other state-of-the-art technologies we need to be thinking about? What, look at the current code. What policies can we implement to augment that? And hiring on a consultant to actually advise us on these issues is going to be a really key thing, because we know we're doing a lot of stuff, but what can we build on top of that to actually implement? We'll also be doing incentives. I always like to talk about that because obviously we also want to make sure that our water customers are also helping to, in the overall vision of conserving water here in Prescott Valley. But we want to make sure that whatever we do, we try to maximize our investment. Water, the amount of water that we save per acre foot, we want to maximize that. So, and we also want to be able to identify potential partners. Obviously the activities will need funding. So there are potential funding partners we can tap into. And really, we want to make sure that what we're doing here in Prescott Valley is mirrored or close to what our neighbors are doing in other municipalities. So talking within the region is going to be really great. I also don't see the point in just focusing on the Quad Cities area. It'd be really great if we can go countywide. So that's kind of my overall vision for that. But obviously we're already building interdepartmental cooperation and collaboration. Let's keep that moving forward. Communication is absolutely key to doing that. And it's been a lot of fun getting to know these other folks that are experts in their own unique fields. Going forward, we're all going to be key to moving forward in that. In our planning process in addition to theirs. We're also going to be soliciting ideas from the public. It's going to be absolutely crucial to, there are folks, very wise folks in the community that we can actually tap as well for information. We want to be able to lead by example moving forward. We've been doing so to date. Why not keep that moving forward? This plan, when it's all written, needs to be formally adopted by the council. So that way, obviously, we will have funding needs going forward. It's going to be really important for the council to be on board with that. And obviously there are going to be some action items that that will need to be planned for using our rate study that you'll be hearing about in the next year. Many of the suggestions that will make it into the conservation plan will be, more than just us here in the Water Resources and Utilities Department. They're going to potentially impact town code, Parks and Rec, everything. So we want to make sure that going forward, all that communication continues into the future. And of course, regional partnerships are going to be absolutely crucial as well. So do you want to summarize here, sir?
I will do that. All right. Thank you, Tracy. You can see just this discussion that you heard from the four of us, the overlap. And that really was reinforced, like I said, that workshop. We'd start discussing some of these topics and go, well, wait a minute, let's talk about that. And so that's what you're hearing today. So in summary, moving forward, again, we're looking at considerations. Each one of us touched on them. We'll continue to look at, as I mentioned, code modifications, or asking ourselves that, what do we need to look at? How can we improve? And again, I've experienced the biggest benefit working with this team because, life happens, work happens, and we get tunnel vision. And for the right reasons that we're focused on, in my case, the code and implementing and planning and all the things we do. And we really have to force ourselves, and I keep repeating that, to consider the other disciplines and how it impacts our decision-making and how critical that is. So we're looking at code modifications, things that might impact us in development services. New development, again, maybe born out of the code, but maybe it could be a policy, could be a recommendation to a developer. Do we want to talk about densities? Again, we want skillful vegetation in this case. We want to make sure we're not, more isn't always better. We know this. and we need to be careful about it and skillful about it. Do we limit the quantity of grass? Nick touched on that. You know, we would consider, not too many years ago, you know, as a designer, if you said synthetic turf, they'd look at you like, what are you, a nut? Do you not live in this world? I mean, what, but we understand that, like a lot of things, there is an appropriate application for artificial turf. And that's why these guys are looking at it in our parks. Low impact development that Ari touched on, there is a depth and breadth of each one of these disciplines and ours that there's no way to communicate that to you today. This is just a fraction of what we're responsible for, and you're hearing it. You know, we enjoy spending time together. And in fact, I can speak for myself. I'd rather spend more because this is so interesting and so valuable and so critical. And we're talking about that. How can we free up more of our time so that we can continue this in an impactful way? Reclaimed water for irrigation. Now here in town, and we've talked about it again as a group, and I know Janelle, you heard us talking about it. You know, it seems so simple. Well, why can't we irrigate with reclaimed water? Well, the capital investment for that to run the pipes, and you know, a lot of us have familiarity down the Phoenix metro area or Tucson. You look at any metropolitan area, you know, when we did projects, it's like, well, just tap into the line, it's right there. Well, that doesn't happen in town here. So that infrastructure needs to be put in place, and there's an extremely high capital investment in that. But it's not being dismissed. You know, it's still being talked about. How can we do it? I know Tracy's talking about water quality, you know, the PFAS subject that I won't get into, and I try not to say the P word, but guess what? If we use reclaimed water and we distribute it, is there PFAS in that? Are we putting that into our groundwater? So those are all things that are being studied statewide. I mean, this is something that's an ongoing, and Tracy can speak more to that, and Ari, I think. And then again, the conservation plan moving forward. What does that look like? How is it funded? It'll be brought to council. So that's in the works also. So I'll leave you with that. Any questions, any thoughts?
Council
Yes,
members.
Ken.
Thank you. As always, you do a great job, John.
Thank you.
And I think all this is well thought out. This will stir up a can of worms, but I was just thinking about this. If we maybe had more than one water treatment plant, one of the problems here is that it's such a long haul to get the recycled water, the reclaimed water, to the other end of town. We've thought about having more than one location, maybe a smaller one somewhere in
Right. I've heard discussion about it. I'm not the one to answer that.
I can make an
Tracy is
attempt.
the one to answer that.
The gentleman who it absolutely does know is not with us this evening, but yeah, I mean, that's something that has been discussed. And I know at one point there were plans to kind of very long range plans to potentially put another treatment plant in place. Those have not been discussed, recently, but I mean, that's a sizable capital investment, obviously. So at this point, we do have reclaimed water lines that go to Glassford Hill Road here and Lakeshore. Obviously, we have a line that goes to Stone Ridge, and we're going to be putting into place one that goes along Glassford Hill Road to Granville. So we can get reclaimed water into a lot of different places if that is what we choose to do. So, but yeah, I mean, for me, it comes back to PFAS, obviously, because I'm a water chemistry nerd. We want to make sure that we are guarding our aquifer, make sure that we're not polluting the aquifer below these areas where we would be using reclaimed water. But yeah, if we can use that reclaimed water to irrigate, then safely, then yes, absolutely, that's a viable concern.
Thanks for a great answer. Also, has there been much discussion or looking into the possibility of encouraging, for example, new construction to have cisterns as well as rain barrels for like, I would love to see it if we could distribute barrels at cost for, that's one of my pet thoughts, to the community, and also to have some kind of a way to encourage, cisterns of various sizes. Thank you.
We actually, that is one of the things that I would like to look at as far as incentives are concerned that we would be offering potentially to our customers. I don't see why not. There are some considerations though, of course, and I try to bring this up every time the topic rears its head. I mean, if you have more water, you tend to plant more things, which then means that you need more water. And then if it's not raining, if we have a protracted period of excessive drought, then those plants then need to be using potable water that, so we're upping then the amount of water that we're pulling from the aquifer. These are all things that I think about. But yeah, I mean, that's one of the topics that I definitely would like to consider during this conservation plan when we're talking incentives. I don't know if you have anything to add as far as code's concerned.
The only thing that I thought of as Tracy was answering is Ernest Ruby, our deputy director in development service, brought to us just this week or the end of last week. And Tracy knows about this from past. There's this ongoing effort to create a regional water district and get the Quad Cities and beyond to participate in that. And what I remember reading about that he had given us is this large scale collection system, which is what you're referring to, and cisterns, but I mean at a very large scale as part of potentially that effort. And you can imagine something like that, I mean, takes years and years to negotiate and get in place. You've got so many moving parts and different folks involved. I don't know, do you know more about that?
On a regional level,
Yeah.
that's going to be a very big project, and I'm not sure. It depends greatly on what you do with the water. A cistern at your home is definitely a different thing because that encourages you to use that water on your property. Collecting stormwater on a regional scale runs up against water rights issues that I don't think have really been discussed at length on that regional scale that would definitely need to come up in massive amounts of discussion before we would ever go into that particular topic.
And Vice Mayor, members of the council and the commission. So on the regional front, we have met with Chino Valley, which had kind of initiated some of that conversation. We've met with Prescott. We'll be convening all of the managers next month and really kind of starting to map out how do we get some low-hanging fruit wins. Things like this are very complicated. Water becomes a very contentious issue very quickly. So we want to try to build have a common conservation plan across the entire Quad Cities. So things that we could all kind of agree on, have consistency within each of the jurisdictions as well as the county. And then once we get that in place, then we'll start talking about how do we look at opportunities for whether it's infrastructure, new water sources coming into the region, those types of things that are much bigger in scale. The dollar amounts are going to be, at a huge level, and we'll have to work through those particular issues. But that effort is underway. We've got the managers and water techies will be starting to come together in the next few months on this.
Any other council members or commissioners have any questions?
And I just wanted to kind of follow up with what Ken said. I met with a group this week, and one of the things that they had suggested, sorry, I can't turn and talk at the same time, was for our commercial buildings, any commercial buildings going in, maybe have like what we're doing with the wheelhouse, collect that rainwater and use that for their own watering for their plants, and maybe having that as part of the code type thing.
Or yes, even doing the rainwater harvesting for recharge type situation at some point would be a great addition to the code, I would think.
Vice Chair Erb?
So I want to be considerate in how I phrase my question because I'm a proponent that, if you own a piece of property, you should be able to do reason what you want on your property. But I routinely drive across this town, my own neighborhood, for example, where I see the public use of water is ferocious. I see people wash their vehicles in their driveway, which I believe the town has a code against that. If our HOA, a lot of HOAs do, push you to using car wash facilities. But I routinely see people doing things that certainly, if applied across the town, where you see one, there's more than one doing it, have an impact on the amount of water that's available to our community. So have we ever talked about or have regulations in place to mandate some public regulations on water on your own property? You know, not washing your car in your driveway. I see people who have irrigation systems, but their system is either not maintained or they have an issue, and you see water running down the street for several city blocks. And you're like, and I see this, I could honestly say I see this on a daily. So if it's happening there, I know it's happening in other places. So as much as I don't want to be the regulator, have we talked about that part of this, right? Because part of this is getting people to change. I came from a state where water wasn't a problem. And, you know, we didn't have some of these issues. And now I live in a state, yeah. If we could pipe it to some of these other states, it'd be great. That's a different story. So have we ever talked about that? Is there anything like that in place? Does the town have any regulations that put some restrictions on the public's use of water?
I'm not aware of any. There's been, you know, in the back of my mind, that's something that maybe eventually we would have to get to regulatory wise. We are in the midst of public information campaigning, trying to get the word out on how best to, on a, you know, home by home basis, minimize your water bill. We're going at it basically from the water bill perspective, right? Everybody is conscious of the amount of money that they're spending on their bill every month. So, hey, you want to spend less? Here are a few tips and tricks that you could actually consider.
One of the things I think about that comes to mind the most, because you're at Home Depot and you're like,
Yeah.
you have grass in this environment, I think is something that just, from personal opinion, should not be allowed.
Yeah.
It should be hardscapes, we should be drought tolerant plants, even on your own private piece of property, in my opinion.
Agreed. Yeah.
And some of the regulations I'd be thinking about would be things like you see California and some of these other southern states do during the summer months. They don't allow people to water their lawns. They die and turn brown. And that's just part of the environment we now live in. So that's some of what I was curious about.
If I could just mention, there are some emergency provisions in the code. So if we were to have a drought situation, the town can declare a class 1 or class 2 and say, there are certain things now you can't do with water.
And a lot of that is propagated by, you know, if we're down a few wells and our capacity is at risk, then obviously you start cutting back on the uses on the other side. So.
Good. Guys, it's really great information. So on that note, I know you guys are looking at like regionally across the area, which is great. I mean, I think that's the bigger picture, if you will. On the residential side, yeah, there obviously needs to be, I like to kind of look at them as incentives, right, for folks as opposed to requirements, only because I think you get a little bit more cooperation when folks are incentivized to do things. I'll give you an example, and forgive me, I've been around for a long time, so I don't know if they still do it, but the city of Prescott had a program where if you had grass, that you could potentially get a credit, water credit, to put towards some artificial type or hardscape type landscape. Things like that, I think, are more appropriate. I happen to be one of those guys that have grass, and I would ask any of you guys. You know, people come to my house and they say, "How in the world do you get your grass to look like this?" I mean, I spent a lot of time on it, not a lot of water. Yeah, it's me. But at great cost, you know, to make, you know, nice grass area. But if given an incentive, I might, hey, well, you know, do something a little different. I'd have to break out the lawnmower.
That's actually one of the example incentives that we're definitely going to be looking at. I've been looking at incentive programs mostly in the valley, although I am also looking at Flagstaff's program as well, just to, kind of see what other people are doing. It runs the gamut. I didn't, we'll be talking about that with council and with, I'm assuming there'll be some public information meetings just discussing some of the potential options and what they would cost per acre foot saved. I think that is, like I said, that's definitely one of the ones. There are a number of indoor options as well that I think we should definitely be thinking about. This is kind of a choose your own adventure type situation. I don't have all the answers. I'm happy to hear from folks other options that they think would be great options for us to implement for incentives.
Commissioner Bredon?
Yeah, just quickly. You talked about reclaimed water and infrastructure, and that is very expensive. I'm glad to hear that you're weighing the costs versus, what benefit there is to use it on public landscaping. But I wanted to also point out that the town really uses their reclaimed water very efficiently right now. You recharge the aquifer not only in passive but active methods like the lakes as well as injection wells, correct?
We do not use an injection well.
Okay, you don't.
Everything is either in the bottom of the Agua Fria River or in the North Plains ponds. Yeah. Yeah.
We have one that had been under design and ready to go. We paused that when we learned of the PFAS. We didn't want to be injecting the effluent straight into the aquifer. So that's on hold until we solve the back end part of the effluent PFAS issue, and then we can do.
Well, thank you. Yes, we're using it where we can, or to where we've already established it to date. It's a double-edged sword. It would be great if we could put it in other places. I want to make sure though that we're not polluting our own aquifer beneath those areas, because we do have, at the cost of $3 to $5 million per well, or in the case of like Little Pete, which is huge, up to $10 million for treatment at that well site. We have to make sure that we're very wise as to where we're using that water.
Any other questions? Thank you very much for the presentation.
Thank you all.
All the hard work that went into it. Thank you. Moving on to item number 2B, Wildlife Corridor Foundation Guide. I want to welcome back Michaela Dunphy with Logan Simpson. And John, I know this also on you as well.
Turn on the mic first, and then introduce the team again. You've met Michaela, the previous study session that we did have. And this time around, we are going to have 4 on Zoom. So bear with us. We're using a little bit of different technology. We're using Teams. We're using the consultant's laptop. We've tested it all, so I don't anticipate any pauses, but just be aware of that. So what I'd like to do is reintroduce the team. We have a couple of new faces. Sandra Hoffman, who you met at the last study session, she's right there. She's remote as well. Michaela, as I mentioned, Michaela Dunphy's right here at the table, and she's really going to lead the discussion. And then we have Mary Geisinger. She's an environmental planner. And also, help me out, Michaela. Delaney Silman is a planner, and she's on the team's call as well. Did I cover it, Michaela? We good? All right. So I'll let Michaela, go through the agenda today and add a little more detail. But again, same format as the previous study session. Feel free to jump in if you have questions as we move along here. But just as a reminder, because we remind ourselves of this, staff, that, this wildlife corridor plan, this first phase, termed the foundation plan that you heard in the last study session, is by definition, that's what it is. And the next step, phase 2, we budgeted for next fiscal year, and we're already talking about moving ahead with that. So I want to let you know that because we catch ourselves jumping ahead. What are the answers? How can we implement this? How can we do this? And we have to pull ourselves back and go, well, wait a minute, we need to get this foundation in place first. And part of, and Michaela will get near the end here, like I said, you can jump in with questions, but I think in addition to whatever elements that you hear from our consultant and our team, that part of the focus today is they're going to present a few strategies moving forward. And what that means is implementing phase 2. Where's the area of focus specific to our town? Because I think you would recognize this, that every wildlife corridor in every region or town or municipality is different. One size does not fit all. Our wildlife habitat's different than, the area down the road or down the valley. Not only is the climate different, but the vegetation, the habitats, the wildlife, the organisms, all the things that are considered as part of this. And we want to make sure we're diligent. It's going to take time to get the answers that we want, I want, and how do we implement it? How do we put it in place? I'm so eager to jump ahead and say, well, let's get something in code so that we can define these limits, and so that when an applicant comes in, we can clearly communicate, this is what's in place. But it's like Gilbert mentioned, on the water side, you can almost take verbatim that description that he just gave about the water, and it applies to wildlife corridor. It's regional, it's local, it's all these moving parts, and we want to make sure that we're diligent and get it in place the way we collectively want it to be, so it's a tool that we can use efficiently and clearly, and not have these interpretations. There'll always be some, but as clear as possible so that we can implement it and really lean on it. Now, having said that, I think you would hear from the team here that it's a living document. Things change, environments change. Rainfall this year might be different than, or over 5 years than it is the next 5 years. So I'm not suggesting that it'll be chiseled in stone. It is a working, living document, but we're eager to get there as you are. So with that, I'll turn it over to Michaela and Logan Simpson.
John, and good evening, Vice Mayor, council members, commissioners. As John mentioned, my name is Michaela Dunphy, and it's great to be back with you all this evening to talk about phase 1 of the Wildlife Corridor planning process. As John mentioned, I have a few colleagues joining virtually, so they are here in the background and available to answer any technical questions that come up. And we do have a large team, as you see up here on the screen at Logan Simpson. We geologists, environmental planners, GIS analysts, graphic designers, and for this project, even a drone pilot who was able to get some great footage of wildlife corridors around Arizona and Colorado to create a mandatory video, which I'll share momentarily. And this evening, I'm going to provide a recap of the full planning process that we've gone to get to this point of having a draft guide available for your I'll share the educational video. Some of you may have seen that in the last work session. We've made some updates as well, and really use that as kind of a starting point for conversation so folks in the community better understand what we mean when we're talking about wildlife habitats and corridors. And I'll talk a little bit about what's in the plan itself, so the community context. Serve as a foundation for talk about the visioning and crafting a vision and the community's values. and talk about some of the case studies that you'll find in the document that serve as a guide for Prescott Valley. They serve examples. We chose comparable communities. And then I'll talk about what comes next. As John alluded to, a phase siting of wildlife corridors, identifying specific project packages that are appropriate and that the town is. And then we'll open it up to discussion, talk a little bit about the effect that you have on this first phase and ideas. So some of you have probably seen this graphic already describing the overall process. So phase one was really the foundation for this work, focused on developing existing conditions, better understanding some of the wildlife habitats and corridors in the community, and then how, how the community values these resources. So visioning community, critical component of this process that led to the creation of the guide, the draft guide, which that will lead into a phase where we can dive into more detail projects that this town is ready to take on. Guide has recommendations, best practices, so tools and strategies and approaches, but we don't cite specific projects for Prescott Valley. That will be phase two. So going back to the importance of visioning for this process, two key really driving this effort, and you'll find are mentioned repeatedly in the document itself. These were topics that we brought up with sessions and focus groups. The first being sustaining ecosystem. We mean conservation. And then aligning growth with nature. So thinking about both conservation as well how those relate. So smart development, community well-being, and then collaborative planning as a really. So I'm going to switch screens that highlights examples of wildlife corridors and what we mean by wildlife corridors and specific examples of interventions. And this drone footage that you'll see in this video is from Arizona, as well as a few examples from Colorado.
Is a wildlife corridor. A wildlife corridor is a natural or planned habitat or crossing that connects animal populations to other suitable habitats. These corridors provide safe passage for native species around development and human activity. What are the different types of corridors? There are 8 types of supported development corridors that promote safe wildlife passage and movement. Existing natural feature corridors, such as a rocky ridgeline or raging river that cannot be developed upon and acts as a natural barrier to humans. These corridors can be planned around and form naturally with our landscape. Funnel-based corridors are created with the use of open space and zoning regulations that utilize the built environment as barriers to direct the wildlife to a single funnel that allows passage through a solar project, town, or region. Trail corridors reserve land for the utilization of a trail for humans and wildlife, but can be slimmer than that of a funnel zoning style corridor. This type enlarges from the trail corridor, utilizing open space, parks, or open style zoning that does not allow for dense development, if any, within the zone. Corridors can also be crossing points for wildlife. Underpass corridors allow for the natural passage of water and wildlife underneath a roadway. The most commonly shown example of a corridor is the wildlife overpass crossing that connects habitats over an existing road and replicates the habitat surrounding the road. The final type focuses on pinch points around roadways, highway exit ramps for big game, and culverts for smaller mammal species. These existing types fall into the final larger scale plan of fencing, which promotes movement based upon the direction and design of fences, creating safe and organized movement corridors. Prescott Valley is planning on establishing a wildlife corridor plan to protect and preserve the amazing native species surrounding the valley. We ask you, What is your vision for wildlife corridors in Prescott Valley? Thank you for participating, and we look forward to you helping us envision the future together. What is a wildlife corridor?
That is just to give you all kind of a sense of some different interventions that came up in the 5 case studies that we've shared in the draft, opportunities that crossing opportunities as well. So takeaways from our process, this is the slide that I've passed out to all of you, just to get a sense of some of the takeaways that came out of the agency outreach that we conducted, the 11 listening sessions. And both of the work sessions, including the one. So some of these key came through in all of the conversations that just general support for wildlife conservation. All of these conversations was apparent. Certainly related to public-private partnerships, opportunities related to policy and development strategies. So thinking about land use and zoning updates. So lots of themes. Stations and meetings and focus had. So you all can take a closer look at explain further in the draft itself, but just wanted to highlight. So community context. In the document, we highlight existing conditions of the area centered around the 3 that are here in Prescott Valley. So riparian waterways, grasslands, and mountain forests. We described some of the challenges and opportunities that exist within each of these habitats, which are a bit difficult to read up on the screen here, but we highlighted key species and then secondary species that inhabit each of these different habitats, and discuss some of the current considerations that so in terms of our process, as I've already mentioned, alluded to, we conducted listening sessions with representatives from the community, from various wildlife elected officials, many of you. So thank you very much for your participation. Developers, with property owners and managers. So hearing those perspectives from the development community, wildlife and conservation advocacy groups. And we also conducted focus groups. So one focus group with staff here in Prescott Valley. So getting perspectives from the various departments at the town, also wildlife experts, and as well developers, property owners. So to really get varied perspectives on questions that we asked these groups, asked you all as well in the first work. But a really comprehensive sense of we also held a community event shortly after that first work session back in May, and had a really great turnout. About 100 folks showed up to that event, where we were able to launch a community questionnaire, where we received over 400 responses. So great input from the community. Community members were able to speak with wildlife experts at the event. We had the Heritage Park Zoological Sanctuary there with some animals, a ferret, a skunk, a snake. So it was fun for families to come and and see. So in terms of community engagement, nearly 600 people were engaged as part of this process. The graph that you see on the left here was one of the key questions we asked in a community question, specifically around what core values should guide the approach to fostering wildlife-friendly growth in Prescott Valley. The top three were 1, quality of life, 2, conservation, and 3, sustainable. Those are some of the top priorities identified by the community. We also asked, what do you see as the main benefits for Prescott Valley taking steps to protect wildlife corridors? The top choice was natural landscape views, followed by regional ecosystem health and quality of life. As part of the guide, you'll also find 5 case studies. So we started this process identifying 34 crossings across the Western U.S. And then developed a matrix ranking criteria to narrow that comprehensive list. 5 specific examples, studies that are relevant to Prescott, with similarities to Prescott Valley, opportunities and challenges that exist, wildlife and conservation efforts. So we narrowed that down to the 5 case studies that you see up on the screen: Town of Marana, the Sonoran Desert Conservation Plan in Pima County, Yavapai County, linkages, Gallatin Valley, Montana, and Ventura County, California. So you'll find those 5 case studies in the document. Provide a great foundation, in addition to the feedback that we received from in developing the recommendations, the best practices in the guide as well. So the best practices are grouped into habitats. These maps are generalized movement patterns of some of the key species habitats, where we've identified some of the major conflicts that exist for these species, whether it's major roadways, whether it's drought or wildfires, fences, development patterns that have inhibited. And within each of different habitats, we highlight different strategy themes. So those themes could be related to restoration, buffering, water conservation, fencing plans, more guidelines and restriction on development. So that could be related to code amendments, and then more broadly, collaboration, education, public. And just wanted to highlight some of those tools and strategies that many of these did come out of those case studies. So the importance of integrating general plans and transfer wildlife corridor plans, making sure land use and zoning code regulations. So, various techniques have been utilized in many of these case study examples, like buffering, fencing, lighting standards, just techniques such as clustered zoning, and overall. We also reference GIS-based habitat modeling as a tool better develop and aid in planning practices as well. And then conservation easements and land. Wanted to highlight some of those tools and strategies that are referenced in the document. In terms of the implementation strategy, this guide is not an implementation plan. It's a path forward to development of that phase 2 plan. Identify specific strategies that the town can move forward. Highlight 3 key approaches. And those approaches are prioritizing conservation of undeveloped lands, incorporating wildlife considerations into zoning and land use policies, and then enhancing regional collaboration and protection. So those are 3 high-level approaches in this guide that will So what comes next? As John and I have both mentioned, that this wildlife corridor plan will be part of phase 2, where we'll actually identify specific actionable steps to move forward. Examples could be wildlife overlay maps into the regulations, applying some of those techniques. So many different strategies that we've explored in this guide, and that we're looking forward to discussing as we move into this. So before we go into discussion, just want to extend a really sincere thank you to everyone who's participated in this. It's been a highly collaborative effort, and I think the strength of the plan lies in the fact that so many voices have contributed to it. From town management to council and planning commission, to many residents who came out to the community meeting, to the folks who participated in our focus groups, all the regional partners and planners, and really great to have that participation, the vision and strategies as well that you'll find in the plan. So with that, we have a few discussion questions, mainly looking for general comments that you all have on the draft. Any feedback that you have for phase 1 as a whole. In particular, if you're able to share any specific strategies or approaches that resonated with you in the plan, that would be great. After that, we can move into anything you want to make sure that we include in what my colleagues' videos as well, for their participation in this. Up to questions and hand it back.
Kayla, thank you. Any council members, commissioners have any comments, questions for the Logan Simpson team? We're done.
Glassford Hill project that the town was part of. Trying to leverage money and actually purchase the land, wait for development, and back on. That's really successful with other partners in developing funding mechanisms, in the council. That's the way I think one of the approaches. So I think you're going to include that in the plan. that's the one I'm looking at to make. And I just think that that'll be one of the most, thank you very much for letting.
Anybody else? Councilmember Frye?
First of all, I want to commend all the work that's been done. I think that this is a great thing. I honestly wish it had been started 3 decades ago, but it's not. So what I ask for everyone is to try to push this thing along. Let's try to do what we can to move this thing along. It's kind of late in the game, but I think it would be a great legacy for us to have done this. So that.
Know where a lot of the pronghorn are now? Is this where we're intending also? Or go through that area? Because I know a lot of people who say, oh, I have them right in my backyard. I love looking at. Because it's also private property behind them, which could be developed. Those, they could still lose having pronghorn in their backyard. Have a whole lot of more protest about now they don't want it because it's going to move the ones that, like, do we know where this is actually going to be?
Thanks, Councilmember, for that question. So at this point, we don't have specific corridors identified, but I can turn it over to my team to speak a bit more about potential future impacts to corridors and going forward and how that will affect in particular pronghorn movement. If folks online, were you all able to hear that last question? Able to jump in on that one?
Yeah, absolutely. Can you guys hear me really well?
Yes.
Fantastic. So as of right now, we've really established where we can tell where the key habitats are that we really need to protect. And so we've found these overall movement areas of pronghorn, and within phase 2, we really want to make sure that we can find those soft boundaries that of this wildlife corridor so that we can utilize multiple strategies. Just one strategy by itself is not going to be enough to keep the pronghorn there and preserve the corridor movement to where people get to still have the pronghorn in their backyard. And so we really need to make sure that we are implementing multiple strategies that will work together so that we can preserve this corridor as a whole and still preserve private property rights, still be able to leverage town budgets that can allow for us to preserve land, as well as being able to implement restoration projects that will bring back even more populations to the area.
Sure. So another, I'll say, controversial question. I have seen in other states where things like highways have to be expanded and interstates are put in, or those things where the governing agency has an option to essentially condemn land and take land for that purpose. Is a wildlife corridor something that sort of option could be pursued in areas where we know we have to put this here and it's on private property? And let's say private property, purchasing of that private property is not an option, but we can't necessarily stop somebody from developing that land, properly zoned, without some sort of mechanism like land acquisition or technical word escapes me at the moment. Essentially, an eminent domain of land, and I'm not saying across an entire corridor, but in areas where we know if we don't do something, it could be developed, and without strict development rules in place, could significantly affect the ability for migration through certain parts of town.
That question certainly came up in our conversations, just, any folks, Mary, Sandy, or Delaney?
Well, this is Sandy really quick. So I believe from the outreach that we've done and the interactions that we've had with Arizona Game and Fish Department, and we've talked to ADOT personnel, ADOT doesn't want wildlife crossing their freeways. So they're somewhat motivated to find ways to encourage them to not, create traffic issues on their roadways. So I think there's some impetus for having that collaboration. And again, it's a matter of once Prescott Valley has kind of defined their plan and their idea of things. I know there's some proposed freeway that's going to be was outlined in your mapping, but that perhaps we can use this as educating them what we find from the studies to be able to get them to say, okay, we know this is kind of a primary area, whether it's a grassland, riparian, or the mountain, that we're able to get them to create some kind of special, whether overpass, underpass, something of that nature, to at least find a solution in parts that they can, and then again, maybe encourage them to modify the alignment slightly. So I'm hopeful in that, because I think once you have this in place, they've seen that it's gone through all the public outreach. I think this is going to be a foundation that can be used as an argument and an encouragement for them to look at some of these things.
Any other comments or questions? Commissioner Hewitt?
Thank you. I mean, other than like high fencing and things like that, I mean, it's really difficult. I like Commissioner Pordon, we worked in the transportation. Like what some people think that the animals don't cross where the signs are. Transportation humor there, sorry. So they don't cross where the signs are. They can really go, anywhere where it's comfortable, where these corridors are, where the cover is, where the water is, those sort of things. So I imagine, and forgive me because I wasn't able to make it to these earlier meetings, but I imagine you guys are studying the current movements of the wildlife in the area, so you understand kind of where they're coming and going from, so then corridors can be created, so future development, and then can make tracks or dedicate tracks to accommodate. Is that kind of the idea?
And I can speak to that at a high level, and then I'll turn it over to Mary. But in collaboration with Arizona Game and Fish, we're able to map and then create those generalized maps that I shared up on the screen earlier. Generalized corridors for key species. But I'll turn it over to Mary to provide a little bit more detail on the data that we have and apps still exist.
Yeah, and then one other comment, so Mary might be able to chime in on that. Do you guys consider, and of course this is cattle, but do you guys consider the open range laws in Arizona and the requirements for that in this process? Because again, open range is a duration here in Arizona, has been for many, many years. Anyway, if that's a consideration as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'll hit on your last point first. So with many similar situations of utilizing open range and open zoning, which allows to preserve that open range land and not allow dense development in certain areas, we've seen really high success in Colorado, Wyoming, and areas of Arizona, especially for preserving pronghorn habitat and movement, because as long as they don't get cut off, pronghorn will move through an area. They're a rather fluid species in terms of many of the different types of migratory species, and will move around the same sort of corridors that cattle also utilize. They really do like to follow rangeland animals, not only just to borrow resources from them, but also to take advantage of the same habitat that they share. And now talking about the research and the sort of background information that we have, one of the major conversations that we had with Arizona Game and Fish is and many local wildlife groups is that there still is a gap in data. We have these great habitat models. We have this minimal amount of tracker data, and we have citizen science with sightings throughout. But what we really like to see, especially that something that can come out of phase 2, is being able to identify where those additional research is needed so we can really pinpoint exact spots. Because Arizona Game and Fish has identified major roadways that do need these wildlife crossings established with a fencing plan that fits for pronghorn. Because currently the variety of fencing along roads such as 89A just can be really hindrance to the pronghorn and many other species, and doesn't stop any of them from even trying to cross the road in certain areas. So creating some of these sort of design plans that can allow for crossings along these roads, especially in some of the areas that have already been found by Arizona Game and Fish, and then from maybe establishing some wildlife cameras so that we can find the even higher crossing points so that we can aim for those areas to do a greater project, such as an overpass, a great underpass with a trail system, or a culvert system, can really help further the plan and its establishment.
Any other questions or comments? Seeing none, I just want to thank you, Michaela, Mary, Sandra, Delaney. Thank you for joining us today. I just appreciate all your hard work as we get closer and closer to the final product. So thank you. John, thank you. Do you have anything else to add, John?
If I could add to that, just really thank Logan Simpson staff. They've been responsive. If you've had a chance to get through the draft, just short of 100 pages, and I didn't find any filler in there. I mean, there's a lot of data in there. On that subject, Commissioner, on the locations of the current, it was mentioned, but the Game and Fish website is a really good resource. You can get on there. We've attended at the county level, regional, and then more recently over at the Highlands Center. Jeff Gagnon with Game and Fish did a presentation specifically on pronghorn. Much more detail up there than he did at the general months before that. But he again showed his website, and what they do is they've collared many pronghorn and track them, and they have it mapped on their website. One of the things that's deficient that he explained is if you think about Fane Road headed north, just to the, well, I guess it would be the east and west, they have not collared in that area. But we've all seen them there. We know they're there. Logan Simpson has some data on that. So, as you heard, we don't have all the data collected. So you have to work with what you have. But some of those things are known. But a fun fact that Jeff shared in a couple of his talks was on transportation subject, that pronghorn won't cross a road if there are more than 5,000 daily trips on a road. And of course, my attempt at humor, I'm like, I didn't know pronghorn could count. So if it's 4,999, they'll go? I don't know. But it's a good kind of indicator of the level of detail they get to, in the work that they do. But they recognize they don't have all the resources to do every area. I actually was impressed and saw some of you folks at the Highlands Center as well, but with the amount of data that they do have. And he ran through all the way from the Grand Canyon all the way down through Prescott Valley into Dewey Humboldt with his discussion, and it was very specific. And then he related it to case studies in Montana and Colorado. But so if you have an interest in that, their website is fantastic with the data they have. I mean, recognize that they don't have some in the areas that we would like to see it. But back to kind of land acquisition, we've talked about it internally in manager's office, and there are some things that, again, there are so many moving parts. I mean, Gilbert brought up a few months ago about, okay, once this is established, if we do have a boundary and we do implement this, we acquire land, however it comes about, who manages that? Does a town manage it? Who maintains it? Who makes sure that it's not damaged and somehow irreparable damage, or it's a good question. I mean, I know there's some case studies, but that's just one example of how intricate this can be, not only land acquisition, but if you are successful, where do you go from there and where the funds come from to maintain it, like I said. So it's an interesting endeavor. And again, I just want to thank Logan Simpson for all their work and look forward to continuing as we move ahead. Thank you.
I just have one related question, real quick. It seems like a major missing link that we don't have collars on our local herd that's up on Payne Road. Is there some arm twisting we can do or something to get a few collars put on? I saw one group today that was 14 of them just across the highway from the Arizona Downs, and we saw one that was a herd of 7 there. Like an important missing link that we need to track them.
Yeah, and I like how you think, because many of us, I'm sure, our head goes right there. It's like, well, if they don't have it, how can we get it? And I think the answer, not knowing specifically, is resources and funding and those things, but it feels like it'd be a valiant effort to go down that path and get with Game and Fish and ask that question. You know, what can we do to get this to the top of the list of your studies? I think that's a reasonable question, and see where that leads us.
I think that that's so important, and it's really not that expensive. That I think if we can't get it through Game and Fish, we could probably get some local people that are concerned and love the wildlife to raise some funds for it.
And on that subject, I mentioned Game and Fish, but you say local, it reminds me, the Central Arizona Wildlife Alliance is a little more locally focused. And so that comes to mind, you know, maybe check in with them. And they also have a reasonable website. It's simple, but it has some data on it. They have an app that you can put on your phone. So if you see the pronghorn, like you mentioned, Ken, you can take pictures of it and send it to them through the app, and they'll map it like real time. So it's kind of interesting. Now, they don't have the ability to track, well, was it the same pronghorn? You know, did we see 500 last month? Well, we saw 500 times. I don't know. So they don't get to that level of detail. And we could go out, sounds like target practice. So, but I think that's a reasonable kind of question or follow up and see what we have locally or even at the state level or county to really push that forward. So I think we can continue that discussion with Logan Simpson and all of us.
Oh, I just wanted to make a comment as well. I live in Granville, and there's a lot of arroyos going through Granville. And next door to me, we have a Cooper's hawk that lives there. And I have to worry because I have kind of a medium-sized dog. But I was coming out of the neighborhood yesterday, and I stopped at the stop sign, and I thought, oh, look, there's a Cooper's hawk head. And I thought, it's a pretty big one. And then I realized it was actually an eagle. It had the white head and the white tail feathers, and on the other side of my backyard is Watson Lake. So I'm sure he was just kind of like saying, hey, I'm checking it out. But it was very.
Vice Chair Erb? I would assume it's probably part of phase 2 when we talk about funding and relative to all the aspects, land acquisitions, you know, work, plantings, all this sort of stuff. Have we started now trying to find organizations that could help with that funding instead of waiting until phase 2 to start down that road? Because I think of things like BLM, U.S. Forest Service, Bureau of Reclamation, you know, all these entities out there and NGOs that could probably help fund some of this. Because certainly the town can't afford to do all this. We're going to have to find money and resources elsewhere to help with some of these aspects. So I'm curious, at what point are we going to start going down that avenue? Because I would think it would behoove us to start now than waiting till a point where like, okay, we've established it, now we need to find money.
Yeah, I think that's important, and I'm in agreement. So I think we need to continue that conversation as with the management of it and those kind of end of the line administrative things, and funding isn't end of the line, but I agree. You know, it seems like it'd be more efficient to kind of push forward on more than one front and really investigate that. So I'm sure we'll continue the conversation with Logan Simpson and with staff and with you folks to see what opportunities we have. But I think that's a reasonable strategy. It's not as linear as some engineers like to think, Ted. I think it's a multi-pronged approach and we can move ahead.
Anything else? All right, again, thank you again to all our speakers. Thank you very much. All right, with that, we stand adjourned. Thank you.
Thank you.